Welcome to Part 69 of the season on Use Blender 2.7. In this video we'll be looking at particle systems. Specifically we'll be making a snow scene with falling snow. Let's go ahead and check out the video of my render results. If I go ahead and press play, you can see that we have a scene with snow on the ground and a monkey head in the middle. But more importantly, yes, we have falling particles of snow that look fairly realistic. That's what we're going for here. Not absolute photorealism, but just kind of a semi-realistic falling snow scene. The snow is not all going in one direction, but it is sort of going from the top right to the bottom left. And the snowflakes are rotating and kind of fluttering around and being blown. So let's go ahead and jump in. The first thing we'll do is get rid of our default cube. In fact, before I do that, I'm going to turn on my screencast key so you can see what keys, or most of the keys, that I'm pressing down here in the bottom left corner. Let's go ahead now, and I'll press N to hide that side panel. I'm going to delete my default cube with the X key. Now, to add a particle system, you need an emitter object. And because I'm making objects fall from the sky, I'm just going to add a plane. So I'll press Shift A to bring up the add menu. I'll add a mesh plane. I'll tap S to scale that up. I'll make it about the same size as my grid floor, and I'm going to scroll out to zoom out, and I'll move that to the top of my scene, just above the light here. Let's go ahead and add a particle system now to our plane, and you do that over here in the properties window under this little stars tab. That's the particle tab. And it's really quite easy to get started. You just click on new with your emitter object selected, and you might actually see a particle or a little dot on it at the start. But let's go ahead, and down here on the timeline we'll press play. And as you can see, to get what sort of looks like particles is pretty easy. And you basically have sort of a rain kind of looking thing, and the particles only last a certain amount of time. You'll notice that because they all sort of turn off at one point, and they don't keep on going forever. They have a lifespan. That's why they're not continually going. They're kind of ending right there because each particle dies after a certain amount of time. Now, you've probably seen this before if you've been using Blender for a little while. And right now I still have the Blender render as opposed to cycle set up at the top in my render menu. And the way that most people see particles for the first time is the way that I'm about to show you right now. If I click on render, it'll go through my camera, and you see these sort of very ugly and novice looking glowing points, and that's not what we want. When you actually render through the cycles render engine, I'll change this up here from Blender render to cycles, and I'll do the exact same render. You don't see anything, and that's actually a good thing. It forces you to actually make the particles look like something, and that was my biggest stumbling block when I was first getting into using particles in cycles. The way that you change what particles look like is you actually have to make an object, and then all your particles can look like that object, or a group of objects. We'll get to that in a second. So what I'll do is actually over here on my second layer, I'll click there. I'm going to press Shift A. I'm going to add a icosphere. The icosphere is just named icosphere. So now if I go back to my first layer where my emitter object is, select the emitter object, and over here in the particles tab, and I'm just going to kind of collapse all of these sections down because we'll be getting to many of them pretty soon. I'm going to not have this halo option selected under render. That's what it renders by when you're using the old Blender render engine by default. Cycles will not recognize that. You can't use it, but we can use objects or groups. So I'm going to select object just to start off here, and I'm going to select the object to duplicate. So I'll click there and select my icosphere, and right away you should have seen now that yes, all of your particles have turned into that same icosphere, and they're using this value of its original size, so basically 5%, 0.05 of its original size, and yes, you can change that. You can even set it to be a random size. I believe the size here describes the largest it can possibly be, because if you scroll this up, you notice that none of them are getting larger, but some of them are getting smaller. That's what that will dictate. So if you don't want them all to be the exact same size, you can turn that value up. But in this case, I'm making snow. That's what I'm going for here. And snow is not all just round circles. It's actually bunch of different clumps of different shapes. So what I'm going to do is go back to my second layer. Actually, I'll go to my third layer. Why not? I'm going to press Shift A and I'm going to add another icosphere, but this time I'm going to use the cell fracture add-on, which I used in the last video. I'll put a link to that on the screen right now, to break apart this icosphere to get kind of funny looking shapes, which I will then add materials to and round out. To enable the cell fracture add-on, I actually already have it enabled here, but if you don't, you can go to the File menu and User Preferences, and then under the fourth tab at the top, Add-ons, you can search for Cell, C-E-L-L, and then enable the cell fracture add-on, save your settings, close it, and then it'll be on your T tool shelf just under the Tools tab right there. So with this icosphere selected, I'm going to click on Cell Fracture. It brings up your new floating window here, which Blender developers don't normally like. But I'm going to change the number of particles from 100 down to, I think, about 18. I think that will give us enough variation, enough different shapes. I'm going to have recursion set to 1. So in other words, it'll break apart 25% of the bigger particles into smaller particles. I believe that's how that number works. So now if I press OK, this will be quite quick because it's only 18 pieces. And then in the next layer over, you can see the original one is still here. But on the next layer over, I have all these chunks. And if I move them around, you can see kind of what they look like. They're going into the middle of the icosphere for the most part. Some of them are not, some of them are, depending on your settings. I'll undo a few times with Control Z. I want to put a material on this, so I'm going to divide this big window into two. I'm going to drag this little triangle area, left click and drag it straight down. I'm going to change this new window into a node editor window, and I'm going to add with cycles render selected. I'm going to go to my materials tab and click on new. Now I have only one of these objects selected, so I'll press A a few times because I want to make sure I can copy the material from one to the other ones very easily. So before I click on new, I have to select everything. I'll click on new, and it gives us, of course, our diffuse and our material output, our diffuse shader. I'm going to leave that because I'm actually going to bring in a funny material here. I'm going to bring in a texture, and I believe this is Veroni, I'm not sure how to say that, image texture, and it's sort of a generated texture. And I'll plug the color into there just so you can kind of see what it looks like once I change my viewport shading to material. Now that's funny in terms of why I would want that. I'm actually going to use that to kind of describe the transparency of the snowflake. I can change the scale here. I'm going to make the scale quite a bit bigger. And all I have to do to copy this to all the other snowflakes, I'm not done this yet, but I could just copy it with Control L, which brings up the Make Links menu, and I can select material. So now they all have that, but we're going to keep going. I don't necessarily want a diffuse shader here, so I'm going to press X with that one selected to delete it. I'm going to press Shift A. I'm going to add a mix shader. That is right there. I'll put that there. I'm going to add a shader. It's going to be an emission shader. We're going to have the snow kind of look like it has some glowiness to it. Snow, like skin, has subsurface scattering. I'm not going to do real subsurface scattering, but I will kind of fake that by just making it glow a little bit. Let's go ahead and plug this into there and that into there. So now we can start to see something. This material is now on all the objects just because I applied it already with Control L on the materials. Let's go ahead and add a shader. We're going to add a transparent shader. It's under the shader submenu there, and I'm going to define where this is transparent using that Veroni or Veronoi material or texture there. So now I have, if I go and change my background of my world to black, and I go to viewport shading rendered, it's sort of describing how our pieces are transparent. If I turn the factor one way or another, it'll go totally transparent or not transparent at all. I'm going to go to right about there. I might want to invert the transparency. So if I go in between here and I press Shift A and I add a color invert, and I put that there, it will flip the Voronoi texture around so that all the blacks are white and all the whites are black, and everything in between gets flipped around. So I'm kind of liking what I'm seeing here, but I want to have all these pieces rounded. We're not going to have any sharp shards of snowflakes. So I'm going to actually go back way to material, viewport shading, and not rendered. And I'm going to leave all these selected, but I'm going to add the subdivision surface modifier to make everything a bit more rounded. It only added it to one of them though, and I changed the subdivisions for view up to 2, so it's a bit more rounded. And I can again use Control L and select, this time, modifiers to copy the modifier from the active object over to all the rest of the selected objects. So now if I click, you'll see everything kind of got a little bit more rounded there. So now if I select each one, you can see it's rounded, and each one has that same sort of surface modifier on it, and it's looking okay. I have to make this into a group now, so I'll press A to deselect all, A again to select all, Control G to make this into a group, and I can name the group over here on my tool shelf. I'll name it Snow. I think that's good to go. Let's go back to our main layer, this one right here, and instead of selecting the round icosphere, we're going to select that group. So I'm going to select that plane. I can make this a bit smaller so we can see the rest of our scene now. I'm going to select the emitter plane and go back to our particles tab, and we're not going to use this object anymore. We're going to use the group, and the group will be Snow. We've only made one group in this file. And so now, as you can see, I get those nice shards that hopefully are rounded. Are they rounded? I can't really tell. Maybe I should apply that. Oh yes, they kind of are. I can't quite tell from here. They look rounded. Or if you're not quite sure, you can always go back to your other layer and one by one apply your subdivision surface modifier if you like. It's not going to matter too much though, because we will be adding motion blur, which will make the snowflakes kind of blur. Let's go and see what this looks like. I'll go back to frame 0, and I'll press Alt-A. That's the keyboard shortcut for play. The snowflakes are going too fast now, and they're not blowing in any way, and there's no turbulence or jittering or rotating. So we're going to adjust the settings that are quite daunting here in the Particles tab. Let's go ahead and leave this playing. I'm going to go to the first section first. That's a good place to start. The number of snowflakes, well, it depends where you start and where you end. If right now, like me, you have the start at 1 and the ends at 200, that means you're going to have snowflakes, in fact 1,000 of them, coming through that entire time. But if you say want to start before frame 0, if you want to have snowflakes already in your scene, in this case I'm going to start at -100, and I'll press enter. Notice how you have, when you have your emitter object selected, you have this cache. It's kind of this salmon or light red colored line running at all times. If you change anything in this window, you're going to have to wait for it to kind of redo itself, reprocess and rerun the simulation to get that full cache again to really see what your result's going to be. Sometimes if you change things right at, like, let's say you're at frame 8 or 10, you have to wait the entire time again for it to go through again, and then a full time again for you to see your actual results. So right now, if you change the amount of time that your snowflakes are falling, you're going to get less snowflakes at any one given moment. So I'm actually going to change my number of total snowflakes over my now 300 frame duration from 1,000 to, I think 5,000 will be a good number, and you can see what kind of happened there. I had to reprocess the snowflakes. Now I think I actually want to make my emitter a bit bigger, and of course it's actually generating these snowflakes from the face of my emitter object. There only is one face right now. If you select verts, you'll get a very different result. It'll only emit from the 4 vertices of your plane, or if you're emitting from some other object, that will work as well, depending on what you want. In this case, I think face is okay. Volume in this case, well, there is no volume, so it's just sort of using the face, but we won't worry about that. I think we're good for this section. I might actually change the lifetime of the snowflake, so I'm going to change it from 50 to let's say, actually let's do 300, because we want the snow to be in the scene the entire time, except when it hits the ground that we're going to make shortly. We're going to actually have the particles die or end themselves when they hit our snowy ground. Okay, I think we're good here. Let's go ahead and collapse that section. We're not going to worry about cache until the very end. We want to make our snowflakes permanent, so I'm gonna kind of leave that for later. Velocity, so right now they are kind of being shot out of this emitter object at a velocity of 1. If I turn that value up, you're actually going to see that because this face is facing upwards, that's the normal direction. If I press tab to go into edit mode, and then I open up my properties panel, and I believe under the mesh display section, you can actually see that the normal of this object, which is that light blue or aqua line, that's the direction of the normal of that face. So if I go back into object mode now, you can see that with this normal emitter geometry, it's actually shooting the particles up before they fall down. I don't want that. In fact, I don't want any starting velocity because we do have gravity in our scene, and gravity is under your scene tab over here. And gravity is set to negative 9.81, which is approximately Earth's gravity, 9.8 meters per second squared. Okay, let's go back to particles. You can play around with these values all you like. You can change, let's say, which direction you want. If you want things to be at like an angle or kind of be going in one direction, you can change the X, Y, and Z values. This kind of simulates wind. Like that. We're not going to use this, we're actually going to use real wind, so I'll enter 0 in for all of those. If you want things to have a random, and I believe this is a random velocity, you can turn this value up. I'm not going to bother doing that. I'm going to have the snowflakes fall quite a bit slower than they are right now because it's going quite too fast for my preference. So I think we're good here. Let's go ahead and collapse that section. Yes, we want the snowflakes to rotate. And if I kind of look at my scene, even though I selected rotate, they're not rotating very much, maybe a little bit. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to change pretty much all of these settings. I'm going to turn my phase out to some random value. I'm going to change both of these randoms, and I'm not sure why these two are here. I'm just going to turn them up to about halfway for each one. I'm going to enable, and this is where we're going to see the biggest difference, I'm going to enable dynamic. And once I do that, you're going to see, as soon as I turn up the angular velocity, now you'll start to see things rotate, especially if I change this value to random. Yeah, so we can start to see some rotation here. I think they might just be rotating, kind of spinning as if they were on a thread, sort of not spinning that way, but only spinning kind of as if they were running down a pole. I don't want that, so I'm going to change, and you can play around with these values. I'm going to change velocity here, that's the orientation, to a different value. Let's try normal and see what that does. It's really up to you. If you pick one of the axes, you might get a good, like object Y or global Z or object Z, you might get a different or better result than I get. I think that's pretty good to me. I might change this to object Z and see what I get. Okay, I don't mind that. It's still going way too fast though for snow. I want to have it sort of be nice gentle snow. So this is where physics comes in, and it's using Newtonian physics. You can change the size of your objects here again. Some of these things are actually duplicated, so some of these numbers you'll see in other sections too. The mass of each one of these snowflakes is set to 1. That's way too high. If you set this number to 0, from my experience, you'll actually get some very bad results, and Blender will sort of freeze up and stop simulating. So I'm going to type 0.2, and did it slow down? Well, technically it shouldn't if the objects fall at the same rate no matter how heavy they are. What I want to do here though is enable drag, and how much your mass is will actually change how much you have to turn drag up. So the more you enable drag, the slower, your snowflakes will fall. And so now the snowflakes are falling quite a bit smaller. If I turn this value up, drag affects it less. If I change this to 0.1, and press enter, the snowflakes will fall even smaller with the same amount of drag. So if you type in 0.05, that's half as much, this drag will affect it even more. So I don't mind what I'm seeing here right now. This brownian, I believe that's how you say this value, is the amount of jitter. This is sort of a chemistry term. It refers to the amount of just natural jitter, I believe from air. And its interaction with air particles that objects, especially things like pollen, would have. So I'm going to turn this value up, and the more I turn up, you're going to see that we get some nice jittering. I like that quite a bit. It simulates sort of this random turbulence. We will be adding turbulence though, so I'll turn it down just a little bit. And I think we're good for this section, except I will check die on hit. I'm not sure if that's necessary for when we add our ground, but let's keep going. Render, we've already set the render to the snow group. I think we're good there. Let's collapse that. Display, I think we're good. At this point, I'm going to add wind, and the way you add wind is actually by using a force object. To add a force object, I'm going to press Shift C to put my 3D cursor back in the middle of my scene. I'll press Shift A. I'm going to add a, where is it? I'm going to add a force field. I'm going to add wind. I touched upon wind in my video on how to make a waving flag. I'll put a link to that on the screen right now in the top corner using a card. As you can see now, I have this wind and it's blowing the snowflakes back up because they have such a small mass. This amount of wind will affect the snowflakes quite a bit. I'm going to tap on my keyboard R, Y, and then 9-0 and press enter. So now the snowflakes are going to get blown not up but in that direction. Now when you have a new wind object by default, it kind of affects the entire scene. The wind doesn't actually start right here. In other words, there is wind over here. It's just kind of going across the entire scene, so it doesn't matter where the object is, although I'll put it over here just to make it a bit more sense. I'm going to turn the wind down a little bit, and that's under the physics tab. It's set to a strength of 1 right now. I'll turn it down to 0.25. And I'll press enter, and you're going to get different results depending on what the mass is, and I've gotten very different results depending on what settings I choose before I do other settings. I'm going to turn my noise up a little bit, and that'll give it some more turbulence there. Maybe I'll turn that down to, let's say, 3. And how are we doing here? Okay, we've got maybe a little bit too much noise. I'm going to turn that down to, let's say, 0.5. And I think that brownian value is starting to come back and haunt me a little bit here. What if I turn noise down to 0? Yeah, I'm going to go back to my particles tab, and under physics, I'm going to turn brownian down to 0.25. There we go. So now we've got a little bit less jitter. We do want some nice randomness though, and that's where we can add a different sort of force field. Right now I've got wind. I'm going to press Shift A. I'm going to add another force field. It's going to be turbulence right there. It's going to go in the middle of my scene. So I'll drag it straight up. It has options under the physics tab, and I'm going to change the size up to maybe about 10. I'm not really sure, and you're going to have to play around with this, what that really means if it's actually 10 Blender units. I'm going to change the strength from 1 up to a higher number just so you can kind of see what's going on here. If you want to have kind of gusts of wind or blowing, that's how you would do it. That's obviously way too much strength and probably way too much size as well. So I'm going to change the strength and size down to just a result that I'm sort of eyeballing that I like. And so now I've kind of got a nice snowy scene. Maybe there's not enough or too much size there. Yeah, I'm sort of liking what I'm seeing now. There may be too much strength still, so let's turn that down to 0.5. Okay, let's go ahead and look through our camera. I haven't done anything with our camera yet, so I'm going to turn on in the view section, lock camera to view of my properties panel, and I'm just going to orbit around that turbulence object because that's in the middle of my scene anyways. I have to add my monkey head and my ground still and make motion blur happen and depth of field happen, so let's go ahead and do that now. I'm going to press Shift A on my keyboard. Actually, I'll press out of my camera, I'll press Shift C to put the 3D cursor back in the middle of my scene. I'll press Shift A. I'm going to add a mesh plane. This is going to be for my ground. I'll scale that up with the S key. I'll go into edit mode with the tab key, and I'm going to press W and select subdivide. We're going to subdivide the ground up. I'm just going to do a quick, in fact, I'll turn it up to maybe 30 over here. You can actually type a higher value in here than 10, which is all you can kind of grab and scroll to by default. We'll come back to the ground in a moment. I'll make it all kind of bumpy like snowbanks, but I'm going to go ahead and add my mesh monkey head. Let's go ahead, and our camera is over there, so I need to rotate it RZ -180, and I'll move it up, and I'm going to give it a quick material. I'll click new. It's going to have a reddish material. Of course, you probably don't want eventually a monkey head in your scene, but I feel like just adding something that makes it something stand out and be the focus of our scene, and it'll actually give us more of a sense of depth when we are able to see snowflakes that are falling kind of right at it and way kind of closer to the camera and farther in the background, so we can see that nice depth of field effect once I add it. So I'm going to press Shift A. I'm going to add a shader. It's going to be glossy. I'm going to make this sort of metallic, and metallic objects have a colored reflection, unlike plastic, which has a white reflection. I'm going to mix those two together using a mix shader right there, and you probably know what's coming. I'm going to add a input Fresnel node, and oops, I'm going to drag and connect those two there. I'm going to turn my index of refraction up a bit, and I'm going to add in a subdivision surface modifier, and I'm going to make sure that monkey head is set to shading smooth on my tool shelf. So now if I look through my camera, I can actually see how big it is. I'll scale it up, put it right about there, maybe rotate it on the Z axis, R and then Z on my keyboard. And let's go ahead and see how this is going to look. I think my snow might be done, and so I'm going to actually bake the simulation. It's not for some reason showing the snow at the beginning of the scene quite as I like it, so I'll press Shift A again, or Alt A rather, to play. I think the length or duration before the lifetime of the snow is too short, and I'm not starting the snow early enough in my scene. So I'm going to select the emitter object and go back to the particle settings. I have the scene starting, or the simulation starting at -100. I'm going to change that to -250, and my lifetime is going to be now 400. I'm just sort of guessing here, and let's go and see how that looks once it resimulates. It's going quite a bit slower than it will. It's only playing at 9 or 8 frames per second or so. No, you know what? I think I even have to start earlier. I'm going to start at -600, which means I might have to change the number of particles actually being emitted. Let's go ahead and wait for it to replay through. It might not always be accurate, depending on just Blender's sort of bugs. There we go. Okay, it took a second. It jittered a little bit because I had to start reprocessing the simulation from scratch. Let's go ahead and press Escape, because now, even though I didn't process all the way through or simulate all the way through, I can still go down to my cache section and click on Bake, and that will make a whole new simulation from scratch. And it's going through right now and baking those, and now there's an extra 33.1 megabytes in this Blender file once I save it, but that's sort of the result of using simulation. I could say simulate to an external cache, so it wouldn't be part of the Blender file, and therefore my Blender file would be smaller, but I don't mind it being as part of my Blender file. So let's go ahead and press Alt A, and as you can see now we have a nice snowy scene. The snow is falling quite slowly. I might go back and change it to make it go a little bit faster, maybe have a bit more turbulence in my scene, but I'm happy with it. What's really going to sell this though is a few things. My depth of field. That's going to make the particles actually blurry in the foreground and background, just like a real camera lens would show close-up objects and faraway objects. The motion blur will sell it, and the snowy ground will sell this effect too, and the lighting, which we'll have to just quickly adjust. So I'll go ahead and press Escape. I'll go out of my camera view. Let's select that ground. I'll press Tab to go into edit mode. Here I have all those vertices because I subdivided up this plane into 30 by 30 pieces when I use W subdivide. So now I'm going to press C on my keyboard, and that'll let me paint a selection. Actually, I'll press Escape and Orbit so I can see this better. If I press C, that'll bring me to circle select mode. I can kind of just paint random bits. I'm just going to pull these up using proportional editing, and that will make it look like there's sort of a bumpy ground that snow has fallen on. So just give me a sec to paint my selection here, and I think we're good. I'm going to select a bit more of the edges around. Okay, I'll press Enter. I'll turn on proportional editing right here in edit mode. I'll enable it, and then I'll press G and then Z on my keyboard to pull these up. Of course, if I scroll down or up, it'll make the circle, you can probably see it on the screen right there, bigger or smaller. and I kind of like that. I'll press tab to go back into object mode. I'm going to add subdivision surface, so under the wrench tab, subdivision surface, I'll turn that up to 2, and I'm going to make this smooth. So now we have our snowy ground. I'm not happy with the lamp yet because it's just a point. I'm going to make the lamp a area lamp, but I'll make it square, and I'll make it 5. I'm going quite quickly here because this is all sort of not the point of this video. I'm happy with the size of it. I'm not happy with the location or rotation, so I'll press Alt-R to clear its rotation. I'll move it over there. I'll tap R. I'm going to use nodes over here in its settings to change its strength if needed. Let's go and see how that looks in the viewport rendered view. The lamp is a little bit too dull for me, so I'll turn it up to maybe 300. And I can't see it right now, but let's just do a little bit of a guess. I'm going to rotate it with the R key like that. And maybe I will turn off, or I'll duplicate my window. And no, that's not what I want at all. I'm going to move it forward so it's facing, or it will be facing once I tap R and then Z, right about there. So now let's see how that looks. I think my snow actually might be or it might be starting to low down. I might have the sky higher if I were to do this again, but I don't want hitting that emitter object. Actually, I just realized that I don't want this emitter object to show up in my scene. That is something very important. You probably don't want to have this big plane up there. So under the particle settings, I can, and I'm not sure if I have to free the bake here, but under, where is it going to be? Under render, I'm going to turn off emitter. Okay, so I didn't have to free the bake, but that's right there. So now when I render out, you cannot see where the snow is coming from. That's what I want. The lamp is still not where I want it to be. I'll press G and then Shift Z so I can move it around. And I'm going to make it a little bit less rotated, like that. When you have an outdoor night scene, light is a little bit more blue often. By default, unless you have like a street light that is yellow, which will contrast quite a lot with the blueness of the night sky. So I'll make it a little bit blue, and I kind of like that. Maybe it's a little bit too strong, so I'll make it 200 or so, and I'll move it just a little bit more that way. I'm liking that. Let's go ahead under the camera tab. I'm going to enable now motion blur, and so now if I actually render out, it will not show up. Motion blur doesn't show up when you just have viewport shading set to rendered. You actually have to do a quick render out, or a real render out rather. I don't want my shutter to be this quick. It's 0.5 of a second. We're going to turn it up to 3 seconds, which will make the snow quite blurred. Please note that it will make other things in your scene blurred as well if they're moving fast or moving at all. So you might want to do some compositing here if you have someone like, let's say, running through a snow scene and you do not want them blurred, but you want the snow to be blurred. But when you take a photo or video of snow, it's often it's at night. You'll often get quite a bit of blurriness. That's why I'm turning this value up. And the last thing I'll do is I'm going to add a empty, and we're going to use that as a target for our depth of field. So I'm going to press Shift C, and I'm going to that'll put the 3D cursor back in the middle. I'll press Shift A. I'm going to add an empty. We'll add an arrows empty. We'll put it sort of at the face of the monkey head, right about there. I'm going to select the camera now. And under the camera tab, I can enable depth of field. And by the way, I have made a video on depth of field before. I'll put the link to that on the screen right now, so you can check that out. I'm going to do this quite quickly. I go through in that video depth of field in quite a bit more detail. But I'm going to focus on that empty right there. And I'm going to change the radius of my scene. I'm going to look through my camera over here so I can kind of see what's going on. I'm going to change the radius size to just sort of make it look like it's nice and blurred. In the foreground and in the background. I quite like that. That's probably blurred more than I originally thought, but that really sells the effect that you have depth in your scene, which I really, really like. Let's go ahead and turn this window into material viewport setting so I can kind of see the overall speed. It's going to go faster than this. Because it's only playing at 18 and not the full 24 frames per second. So we'll expect more speed when I render out. But I think that will be it for this video. If I do a quick render just to finish this off, you'll see what the results will look like. So I'll go to my camera tab and I'll turn my render up to full 1080p, and I'll render this out. It'll take a few moments. Alright, so finished rendering it. Let's go ahead and take a look. I'll make this window full screen so you can see the result. I think it's looking quite good. If I were to play around with these shapes a bit more, I think I might do that if I were making a production with snow. I'm not quite happy with just the fact that these look like rigid, pointy objects, but it doesn't look too bad. I did forget mentioning something in the video. If you want your snow particles to actually die or finish or end when they hit an object, I'm going to actually make this window bigger so we can just look at our scene in without any rendering. If I select my ground object and I want it to be a collision object for the snow particles, I could go to my physics tab, I could add collision, and then I could click on kill particles, and that would enable it so that when these snow particles hit the ground they would actually end and you wouldn't have any particles going through the ground and continuing on. But that will be it for this video. If you learned something, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel to see more videos just like this one in Blender and in tech. Go ahead and check out my Facebook page at facebook.com/borncg. But that'll be it for this one. Thanks. Bye-bye.